So there's something really cool that Watchmen did with its score. And no, I'm not talking about where, when, and why they used Bob Dylan or Simon and Garfunkel, which, come to think of it, it kind of makes you wonder if Watchmen had some sort of influence on future superhero soundtracks like Suicide Squad or Guardians of the Galaxy. And I'm not talking about how all these characters have different themes or how they're related or anything, because I don't think I really heard each character getting their own theme, but I might be wrong there because I saw a few characters' names pop up in the score's track list. But overall, I think when you look back at this film and try to remember a piece of iconic music, you don't really think of one big bad main theme like you might think of with Superman or Batman. I think most of us gravitate toward that Bob Dylan intro or something similar, at least I know I do. Which makes sense because if you think about it, this is a really hard film to score. Like, these characters never come together to be the actual Watchmen, really. So having a main theme for the team, and by extension the movie, wouldn't really make that much sense. There isn't just one protagonist or main character. The villain has this morally gray, kind of the good guy, kind of the bad guy, but it's really all about a conflict between two different perspectives kind of thing going on, which I guess maybe you could write themes for Rorschach and Ozzy that are in contrasting key centers, or maybe one's the other one backwards, kind of to convey their opposing morals, but then how would you fit the rest of the characters into a big musical plan like that? And then if the director still wanted to have the pop tunes in the film, how would you balance all that together? Like, think about it. How would you actually go about musically representing Dr. Manhattan? He's this omnipotent being. He can do anything. And politically, he sort of doesn't really represent anything. He literally spends half the film on a different planet away from the rest of the characters. How would you write something to express that? He has this whole thing where he experiences all of time at once. Past, present, and future all happen at the same time for him, which for music is kind of a huge problem. Time is the canvas on which we paint music. So if this character experiences all of time at once, how would that character experience music? How would you write a theme for Dr. Manhattan? Well, this was their answer. Check it out.
I am looking at the stars. They're so far away, and their light takes so long to reach us.
What we're listening to is music from a film called Koyanis Katsi, or more specifically the tracks Prophecies and Pruit Ego. I'm pretty sure that's not how you pronounce that. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure that this is actual footage from the film, because the whole film is about an hour and a half of what looks to be stock footage. It's one of those experimental films with no dialogue or story or anything like that. But this film was scored by a guy called Philip Glass. And although Glass has scored a few films of his own, I've always heard him talked about in terms of his influence on minimalism in music. Now, minimalism in music, or music that is minimalist or minimal music, however you want to call it, is kind of hard to explain, probably because I'm not 100% sure I understand it myself. But from what I do understand, minimalism in music was an American response to serialism that rose to prominence in Europe from people in the Second Viennese School like Schoenberg, Webern, and Berg. That serialist music was really complicated, dense, and dissonant. So as a response, minimalist composers wrote something that was consonant, less dense, and overall more simple. It's a really interesting style of music to look at. It originated in America and has a handful of composers that really committed to the craft. The first minimalist composition is kind of tough to nail down. Some people say it's November by Dennis Johnson, which is a piece for piano that's supposed to last for about 6 hours. Others say that the first minimalist composition was In C by Terry Riley, which is a piece made up of any number of musicians playing through a chart of musical patterns at their own speed. See, the whole idea behind minimalism in art in general is to only use what you absolutely need. It's all about efficiency. You cut away at everything that is not essential. So, for example, what's the smallest amount of information I'd need to communicate the idea of a house to you? Well, what is the visual representation of a house stripped of everything that's not essential? Well, I could do it with 3 rectangles on MS Paint. Look at me, I'm an artist. That'll be $7 million. Right? That's how this works. So with minimalist music or minimal music, you'd think it'd all be about expressing a musical idea with as little information as possible, right? Well, this is where minimalist music kind of loses me. See, something you tend to see a lot in minimalist music is a focus on process over moment or event or some sort of goal. The idea is that in most music that you'll hear on a regular basis, like most tonal music, there's an idea of direction and arrival. This kind of music will typically move toward a specific goal and have a climactic moment or event. that. But in minimalist music, instead of arriving at that goal, music tends to be more about the process that created it. So for example, that piece by Terry Riley, In C, the idea is that Riley doesn't really have control over the piece of music. The whole idea is that the performers move through the chart at their own speed, meaning that although there isn't one big moment where the whole ensemble comes together, that's not really what the piece is about. It's about the process of the music being created and what went into guiding the performers into creating that sound. Another minimalist composer by the name of Steve Reich came up with a group of pieces where the same recording would play on two speakers, but one would be ever so slightly faster than the other. So over time, the two recordings would phase in and out of sync. So even though there would be a moment in the piece where the two recordings would go out and come back into sync with one another, the piece is really more about listening to the process of the tracks phasing in and out. Or you could look at a whole opera by Philip Glass himself called Einstein on the Beach, which is about 5 hours long, has no plot, and a lot of the words are just numbers. It's really weird. But again, it isn't about arriving at some sort of destination or moment, it's about how the piece was created, it's about the process. Which, like, cool, I get it, but what does that have to do with minimalism? If minimalism is all about cutting away at everything that isn't essential, then wouldn't minimalist pieces of music be, like, short? Or less complicated? Or just very, very simple? Like shaving a haircut. That's minimalist, right? I actually had a really hard time understanding how this music had anything to do with minimalism until a professor explained it to me in kind of a unique way. But full disclosure, I haven't been able to find anyone else talking about minimalism in music like this, so there is a chance that it's wrong, but it's the only way I've been able to understand what makes this music minimalist. So let's go back to Shaving a Haircut. This is a piece of goal-oriented music. It has a sense of direction and arrival. It's this resolution right here. See those last two notes? Those last two notes make up a resolution. That is our arrival. It's the climactic moment of this small passage. So what if I wanted to look at this piece from a minimalist perspective? How would I break this idea down into its essential pieces and strip everything else away and still have it make sense? Well, we don't really need the beginning of this idea. We really only need these last two notes, right? Well, beyond that, we don't really need these last two notes at all. We're exploring the space in between these two notes because that's our resolution. That's the moment in time we're trying to explore. We're cutting away at everything that isn't essential and exploring this one musical moment. So using music, how would we explore this space and have it last longer than just this one infinitely small speck in time? And on top of that, how can we explore that single musical moment in as much detail as possible using as little as possible? Well, maybe I play those two notes over and over again, trying to recreate the moment over and over again in order to keep that moment fresh in the piece of music. And then we have this pulsing idea. But without the context of the melody, these two notes don't really have that resolution. So what if I played the two chords that would support this kind of resolution over and over again as a means of emphasizing the difference between them, so I can have that moment of resolution repeat over several minutes? Well, what about instead of just repeating those two chords over and over again and having the resolution happen every other beat, what if I look at the different notes between them and just repeat the first chord over and over again, but slowly morph that first chord into the second chord by only changing one note every so often? So instead of having this resolution happen in a single pulse, we can stretch it out and have it last several minutes. Maybe now we can go back and use the melodic material that came before this resolution in order to color this moment slightly differently and show how this resolution is different from just one chord moving to another. So maybe while I'm playing these chords over and over again, slowly moving from one chord to the other, only one note at a time, I could also play portions of the melody on top of that, and I could slowly move through different motifs made up of the melody as a means of showing how this melody is significant in preparing the resolution. And what you end up with is something that conveys a bigger musical idea with as little information as possible. It's the exploration of this single fragmentary moment, suspended in time. From what I remember, and realistically the only way I get it, is that some aspect of minimalism in music is taking that critical moment in a piece of music and expanding on it as much as possible. The whole point behind these pieces of minimalist music isn't that there's some big moment. The piece is the moment. The whole point of these minimalist compositions aren't to have the whole ensemble come together at one big moment. The whole point is that these pieces are the moment. Instead of having that piece of music go through a journey and arrive at a climactic moment, you blow that single moment up and have the entire piece of music exist in that one tiny musical speck. Which is the only way I can understand how this type of music is minimalist. It's the only way that makes sense to me. It's not about arriving at a single climactic moment, it's about exploring what's within that infinitely small iota of music, where time doesn't really move. Kind of like you were able to perceive the past, present, and future all at once. It's interesting. When he has to come up with his own logo, he goes for a hydrogen atom, probably the most basic scientific structure that most people can recognize. He's always talking about wanting to remove himself from the complications of human life, cut away at the excess.
I am tired of Earth. These people. I'm tired of being caught in the tangle of their lives.
They make a point of saying that Dr. Manhattan was the arrival of the superhero.
Hollis Mason, a retired costume hero, writes a book. In it, he calls my arrival the dawn of the superhero.
Dr. Manhattan's the only character in this story that really has any powers. Everyone else is just rich or good at punching. And by extension, Manhattan is the only character that gets his own licensed piece of music to function as his theme all to himself. His entire origin story is him being completely disassembled and stripping away the excess and having to reassemble himself from the infinitely small subatomic particles that make up the universe, but only use exactly what he needs. He's suspended in his own control over matter, and he perceives the universe by the smallest possible particle.
I have witnessed events so tiny and so fast, they can hardly be said to have occurred at all.
He perceives his past, present, and future all at once. He's suspended in that moment. Dr. Manhattan is the perfect hero to have a minimalist theme. But maybe I don't get it. Maybe I don't understand how this music is minimalist. Maybe I don't understand minimalism in music at all. Maybe I'm just way off base here. So I'll keep it simple. Minimalism is about stripping away everything that isn't essential, which literally is what Dr. Manhattan is. So if you had to give him a theme, why wouldn't it be minimalist? You know, it's funny. Minimalism began in Manhattan in the 1960s. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank all my patrons for making these videos possible, with a very special thank you to Hayden Elza, Charlie Heberer, Donovan Hodges, AFN Matt, Ethan Rooney, Karen Rosenau, and Clara Tan. If you like what you saw here, be sure to check out my other videos, follow me on Twitter and Twitch to have your musical questions answered live, and if you really like what I'm doing, consider supporting the channel on Patreon. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching.